Okay, class, now that we've finished reading the book Holes, we're going to use it to learn more about the 5 elements of plot development. These 5 elements are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Now we're going to go more in detail about each of these elements.
The first element of plot development is the exposition. An exposition is at the beginning of the story where the characters, setting, and situation are introduced. The exposition is really important because it sets the scene for the rest of the story. In the beginning of Holes, Stanley Yelnats is sent to Camp Green Lake for stealing a pair of shoes. The main characters of this story are Stanley and the boys that he meets at Camp Green Lake. The exposition of Holes is unique because while it occurs at Camp Green Lake, it also happens to be in present time as well as has flashbacks to the past.
The rising action is where the main character or characters face conflicts or events that lead up to the climax. In Holes, the rising action is where Stanley's friendship with Zero alienates the other boys at the camp. Because Zero is digging part of Stanley's hole, it makes the other boys feel jealous. This leads to increasing tension between the boys, and it eventually erupts in a fight. This causes to lead Zero to run away from camp, which causes Stanley to steal Mr. Sir's truck in an attempt to bring Zero water. Once the two boys have run away from camp, there's no going back and they have to make important decisions about their future.
After rising action, the next element is the climax. The climax is the turning point or the most important moment of the story. In Holes, the climax occurs after Stanley and Zero have descended the mountain and are returning back to camp. Stanley and Zero happen upon a hole containing Kate Barlow's treasure. This is a defining moment for Zero and Stanley because they realize that they have broken the curse and altered their futures. The climax ends with the warden discovering Stanley and Zero covered in yellow spotted lizards.
The following action is composed of the events that happen right after the climax that lead to the end of the story. The following action of Holes occurs after the boys have found the treasure of kissing Kate Barlow. Stanley's new lawyer comes and tells him he was innocent the whole time. Then both Stanley and Zero are sent home from Camp Green Lake.
The fifth and final element of plot development is the resolution. This is where all conflicts are resolved and loose ends are tied up. In Holes, the resolution occurs after Stanley returns home to find that his father has invented a promising new product called Sploosh. Stanley also opens the treasure and finds millions of dollars. Stanley and Zero become rich, and Zero, at the end of the story, finds his parents. Now that we have gone over the 5 elements of plot development for Holes, we want you to separate into your groups from yesterday that you wrote your short stories in.
As a group, analyze your short story for plot development.
Once you have identified the exposition, rising actions, climax, falling actions, and resolution of your story,
each group will then take turns going to the front of the classroom to present their short stories. From the short story that the groups read, the rest of the class will then try to identify each of the elements of plot development within that story. Students will be graded upon how accurately they identified each of the 5 elements of plot development in the group's story. The groups will also be graded on how accurately they defined their elements of plot development in their own stories.
At this time, you may now separate into your groups and begin working.